Hey everybody, and welcome back to my coverage of the PogChamps 3 tournament. Today we're looking at the Daniel Negreanu versus Rubius match, the second game. If you missed the first game, it was a really exciting game, lots of blunders and missed wins from both sides, but still somehow a very evenly matched game. So if you missed that, go check it out. It's going to be the little info box up there. This game also very interesting. Negreanu had the white pieces, so Rubius needs this win to take the match to an Armageddon game. Let's see if he can do it. Negreanu has the white pieces. He starts out with e4, so he's maybe hoping for a Danish gambit because that's what he plays as white. But Rubius plays d5, a Scandinavian defense, so denying Negreanu his Danish gambit. We have e takes d5 and knight f6, so Rubius playing the same opening he played in his match versus XQC. This is kind of the modern way of playing the Scandinavian rather than immediately taking this pawn. We have knight to f3, and now Rubius regains his pawn with knight takes d5. Bishop e2, just developing from Negreanu, and here Rubius makes a huge positional weakness, which is f6. And yeah, so this is definitely not a good move. I think Rubius's idea behind this move was he wants to support e5, but he can't play it right now because the knight is guarding that square, and he doesn't have a d pawn to support e5, so he's going to use his f pawn to support it. But this is just a terrible move because you weaken this diagonal and you weaken this diagonal, and your king is going to be on e8 and g8 for probably a large portion of the game. And so you really just don't want these light squares around your king to be weakened, because when you have all these pawns on dark squares around your king, the light squares around your king are very weak, and it basically leaves you open to attack from and open to a lot of tactics from white's pieces. So yeah, putting your pawns like this in the first 4 moves of the game around your king, definitely not a good idea. But we'll see if Negreanu can punish him for it. We have castles and e5, so Rubius now continues his plan, and Negreanu plays d3. D4 would have been probably more aggressive, just trying to open up this center with black's king still in the center. Definitely d4 would have been better than d3, but d3 is also fine as well. I just want to show an example line that could have happened if this d4 move has been played. So Rubius likely wouldn't have taken. He probably would have played e4 to try to keep things closed. And here you can play knight e1 or even knight fd2. But rook e1 is a very interesting move that is also playable for white, because now after e cross f3, we have bishop b5, double check on the king, so the king has to move. You cannot block this check. And now we have rook e8. So the queen is nearly trapped. The queen has to come to d6, and it's a skewer on the queen to the bishop. The rook now picks up the bishop, and this is a very complicated position. So we could have seen this position, but we did not, because instead of d4, we have d3 from Negreanu, which once again is a perfectly fine move. We have bishop d6 and c4 from Negreanu. One thing to be aware of when you play this c4 move is that this d3 pawn is going to be, it's called backwards, and basically what that means is it can never be defended from with a pawn from behind, and also it can never advance to a square that is defended by a pawn from behind. And this pawn is especially weak because black has really nice control over this d4 square with his e5 pawn. So that's just something to be aware of when you play this c4 move. You're making this d pawn weak, and it will probably be weak for the rest of the game. Though it does gain a tempo on the knight, so it is playable here. That it's gaining this tempo is not the only reason why c4 is good, but yeah, it's just important to be aware of weaknesses that you are creating when you make these sort of pawn moves. Anyway, we have knight e7 from Rubius, which is the best move, and we have knight c3 from Negreanu, just continuing to develop. Perfectly fine. We have castles and h3, preventing any bishops from coming to g4 from Negreanu. We have b6 from Rubius, so looking to fianchetto his dark squared bishop, or light squared bishop, sorry, fianchetto his light squared bishop. And here we have a very severe positional inaccuracy by Negreanu. He plays g4, and we saw him do this in the last game too, last game of this match, where he advanced the pawns in front of his king for, I'm not sure what reason. I think it's to try to attack his opponent's king, though using the pawns in front of your own king to try to attack your opponent's king is usually not that great of a plan, because by the time your pawns get to your opponent's king, your opponent's pieces have already taken advantage of the weaknesses you've created, and so you just don't have enough time. This plan is almost never going to be effective. So yeah, g4, just totally weakening the squares around Negreanu's king. Definitely not a very good move. I think maybe what Negreanu was thinking, if he wasn't thinking that this plan of trying to open up Black's king with his own kingside pawns, was maybe he was trying to take this f5 square away from the bishop or the knight. But yeah, so those were two possible ideas Negreanu had behind making this g4 move, but overall, not going to be a good move overall, or a move that you're going to want to be playing. We have bishop b7 from Rubius, just continuing to develop, and we have king g2 from Negreanu, now stepping into this pin. Not sure what Negreanu is trying to do here, but maybe we'll see what his plan is in the next couple moves. We have c5 from Rubius. Definitely, I think this is a good move, just cementing this weakness on d3 and giving him a little more space. The queen can potentially come to c7 now, and the knight can come to c6. We have rook h1 from Negreanu, and so this is why I think Negreanu was planning on advancing these pawns, because now he's using his rook to support this pawn, these pawn advances. But really, like, if you're going to advance these pawns on the king side, you should really just castle queen side, because your king is never going to be safe. And if you wanted your rook on h1 anyway, you know, when you castle, your rook moves to f1. So if you're just going to move it back to h1 and advance all your pawns, you should just castle queen side. So yeah, we have f5 from Rubius and g5 from Negreanu. So I think Negreanu is going after these pawns because he wants to open up Rubius's king. But soon Negreanu will realize that his own king is very, very weak. We have e4 from Rubius, just trying to push these menacing pawns and kick around White's pieces. So this is already looking very good for Rubius. We might be going into an Armageddon game if this game continues in Rubius's favor. We have knight d2 from Negreanu. You don't really want to take here and allow Black to get this half-open f-file, so knight d2 is a perfectly fine move. And f4 from Rubius, and this is definitely a blunder. This pawn, you do want to, you know, take advantages of the weaknesses around White's king. However, this pawn was defending the pawn on e4, so f4 allows White to simply take this pawn on e4, which Negreanu does. And here, Rubius responds with bishop to e5. We have bishop f3, now breaking this pin on the knight, so now Negreanu's knight can move, and knight b6, Rubius developing that last piece. We have h4 from Negreanu, just continuing to push his pawns like his plan was, and knight d4 from Rubius. So looking to potentially pick up this bishop, which is breaking this pin, and then White will have another pin on this diagonal. However, this knight d4 move actually allows a very tricky move for Negreanu, which is knight f6 check. And the reasoning behind this move is you lose the knight, so we'd probably see g takes f6 from Rubius, and this allows bishop takes b7, and you're basically trading this sort of average knight, or maybe even arguably weak knight, since it's pinned to the same diagonal as the king, you're exchanging that for Black's best piece, basically. This bishop on b7 is definitely Black's best piece in the position a couple moves ago. So if you can trade this sort of average knight for this very strong bishop, that's definitely a trade you want to be making. And after rook b8 and bishop e4, White is all of a sudden back in this game, even though the king safety is not that great. You're not even really worried about this f5 push gaining a tempo on the bishop, because when Black has this pawn at f5, now the knight can't come to f5. This kingside pawn structure is going to stay closed now, so simply bishop f3, and White is actually doing perfectly fine, arguably even winning here. But this knight f6 move is very complicated. It's hard to see that as sort of an intermediate, trading this knight for this very strong bishop. So instead, we just have h5 from Negreanu. We have rook f5 going after these pawns laterally, I think, or maybe I don't actually know what this move is doing. But we have g6 from Negreanu and h6 from Rubius, just totally shutting down Negreanu's plan. And this is also one of the reasons why this plan is not very effective from Negreanu in the first place. We have bishop g4 from Negreanu, and once again, Negreanu could have played this knight f6 move. He had this move available, but bishop g4 is a completely fine move as well. We have f3 from Rubius and king f1, so now Rubius is going to save his rook, and he does that by playing rook f4. However, this doesn't actually save the rook because the bishop on c1 covers the f4 square. So here you needed to simply play like rook f8, or even if you wanted to be very spicy and sacrifice the exchange with a move like rook b8. This is probably dubious, but it's possible. You're arguing basically when you do this that this bishop was a better defender of White's king than the rook was an attacker of White's king. That's basically what you're arguing. This is probably playable, but probably not as good as simply rook to f8 here and just saving the rook. But we didn't see either of those moves from Rubius. We have rook f4 instead, and will Negreanu see that he can take this rook? Yes, he does with bishop takes f4, and after bishop takes f4, White is actually doing very fine here. Black's attack has sort of fizzled out. However, DNegs allows Rubius to get right back in the game with this next move, bishop e6 check, and yeah, this is just a terrible move. Negreanu must have missed that this knight can move backwards and defends this e6 square. So kind of a meaningless check anyway, even if this knight wasn't here. This check really wouldn't have done much. It probably would have just been better to pick up this f3 pawn instead. So yeah, but will Rubius see that he can take this bishop? Yes, he does. He takes it with knight takes e6, and Rubius is once again in the driver's seat. We have queen e1 from DNegs. Once again, you really just got to take this pawn. This pawn is super strong, restricting your king, restricting this pawn. You really just got to get rid of this pawn as soon as you can, and right now is a great choice. You also maintain contact with this d3 pawn, which queen e1 does not, so now you're allowing Rubius to come down here and take this pawn with check. Rubius would actually gain 2 pawns after king g1 and queen takes c4. This would be great for Rubius. However, Rubius did not go for that. Instead, he went for knight f5, so just trying to bring more pieces into the attack. We have knight d2 from DNegs, so this is a discovered attack on Black's knight. Will Rubius see it? Once again, Rubius has this queen takes d3 check he can go for, but instead Rubius just defends his knight with queen d6. We have knight ce4 from DNegs, and this is when Rubius realizes that this pawn on d3 is hanging. He plays queen takes d3 check. After king g1, Rubius, in a bit of time pressure, has only 1 minute left on the clock, and he missed a move because he played queen takes e4, which is terrible because Rubius must have missed that this knight was defending this other knight on e4. So yeah, if you want to go for this trade, you got to take with the bishop first. Going for this trade really isn't even super necessary. You could play a move just like knight e d4, though you are up in material, so taking this knight is also completely fine. You could probably go into a winning endgame. But Rubius plays queen takes e4, and after knight takes e4, Negreanu did not miss the hanging queen. Negreanu is now hugely winning. We have knight e d4 from Rubius, and once again, another blunder from Negreanu. We have rook h4, which totally allows Rubius to get back in the game with knight takes h4, because that's a free rook. However, this is not where Rubius played. This is not where Rubius played. But Rubius played bishop takes e4, which I didn't actually mean to advance to that move. I want to take a look at this knight takes h4. Here, Rubius would actually have a really sneaky trick with the move knight f6 check, and the idea is you can't actually take this knight. You have to play king h8 because if you take this knight here, there is queen e7, and it's actually going to be checkmate. So there's nothing White can do to stop this. So Rubius could have taken the swindle like this, or sorry, DNegs could have taken a swindle like this, but Rubius did not even take the rook. Probably a little bit of time pressure there. As you can see, he's only got 10 seconds left. Instead, he took this knight on e4. And after queen takes e4, rook takes f4 actually is more accurate than queen takes e4, and we'll see why here in a second. But queen takes e4 is also winning, but now this actually allows this sequence from black, which is hard to see, but I'll show you it right now. We have knight e2 check, and now it doesn't matter if the king goes to f1 or h1. We now have this knight g3 check. Actually, the variation I have is the king goes to h1, so let's take a look at that. We now have this knight g3 check, and after f takes g3, it doesn't matter that the pawn can take because we have a second knight that can take, and now this is a fork on the king and the rook. So we have king h2, knight takes e4, and after rook takes f4, knight f6, rook takes f3, and rook d8. We go into this endgame where white is up in exchange, so white would still be winning, but this would give Rubius at least a much better chance than what happened in the game. So instead of this knight e2 check, that was the move, we have knight takes h4. Now Rubius takes this rook. However, it's too late because you can't actually take this rook. You don't have time to take this rook here because your own rook is hanging when the queen takes on e4. But Rubius takes on h4, and now this is a simple mate in 2 as long as Negreanu sees the rook, which he does with queen takes a8 check, and black only has one move. Rubius plays it out, bishop b8, and queen takes b8, checkmate. So Negreanu raking in another win. This is his second match win, also second shutout, I think. But yeah, he was the favorite to win this match. He does end up winning this match. These are the standings for Group B so far. So once again, that XQC versus Pokimane match has been delayed. I'm not sure when they're going to make up that match, but whenever it happens, I will cover it. The top 2 players in Group B will advance to the single elimination tournament after the group section is done. So yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say about this game or this match. Nice job, DNegs. Try again next time, I guess, for Rubius. And yeah, check out my PogChamps 3 playlist for more PogChamps 3 recaps, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on more chess videos, instructive chess, everything like that. I love you all, and I'll see you next time.